Hey y'all, welcome to another podcast. This one, the first one in English, actually. For those of you who don't know me, uh, I'm a coach. I'm from Brazil. I am finishing my master's degree in Texas currently, my MBA in business analytics. Nothing to do with fitness, but fitness is my passion. I've been training for uh, 16 years, I guess, 15 years, but I've learned everything from dieting, training, PDs from the internet, I would say. And then, just like any other coach, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And then, I started coaching like 3 years ago. And now, most of my clients are from Brazil. I forgot to say that. And all of the listeners to this podcast are also from Brazil because this one's going to be the first episode in English. And I have the honor to have here with me Adam, all the way from now. Where are you at? Thailand.
Thailand currently, yes.
He's in Thailand. I'm in Texas. You guys are probably in Brazil. I'm gonna put subtitles in Portuguese, so it's gonna be a pain in the ass, but it's worth it. And yeah, so connections, I would say. So Adam, thanks for being here. Can you give like a brief introduction? We
Of course.
I forgot to press recording, so we were essentially talking about our stories and stuff he's experienced, and then he was gonna start to explain his story, and then I was like, hold on, let me press recording. So yeah, please Adam, give us the honor.
Yeah, awesome. Well, yeah, man, thanks for having me on. I appreciate, I always love, speaking to people, like-minded about bodybuilding, just everything in general. So I appreciate that. And, hello to everyone in Brazil. It's fantastic. I would say picanha is my favorite food. So I do know a little bit about Brazil. And that is for sure. No, legit, it is.
Great steak.
Let me go on don't let me go on a tangent about that. But generally, picanha is like top for me.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
100%. But yeah, going into the bodybuilding side of things, as people said, I'm Adam. So I'm a bodybuilding coach. A little bit more of my background. I've been sort of in the bodybuilding industry for about 15 years now. I'll take coaching for about a decade. Most of the time, my coaching was just basically coaching people that I knew around me, because my main profession that I did for a number of years was I qualified as a chartered accountant in Australia, and basically a solicitor. I got my law degree, did my legal training, and just didn't decide to go down that path because coaching was something that I was always passionate about. Bodybuilding I was always passionate about, and that's basically what I've been doing the past couple of years. I would say I specialize mainly in like prep athletes, male and female. Recently, just basically helped my partner Kat win her IFBB Pro card in wellness. So that was a great experience. And then yeah, in terms of myself, similar to Felipe, my qualifications have nothing to do with bodybuilding, but most of the time it's a combination of understanding to like interpret the data, applying it in your own real life scenarios, because I find bodybuilding, in my opinion, is a combination of looking at what we know in theory and sort of extrapolating that information and then trying to apply it to bodybuilding, because there's a lot of great information out there, a lot of different medical and scientific studies, but often not, they don't necessarily always apply. And I guess that as a coach, I find that that's where we are sort of trying to bridge that gap and apply how can we bodybuild smarter, how can we bodybuild better, how can we stay more healthy, how can we stay more safe, and how can we put as much muscle as possible whilst doing it in the
Fuck
most
yeah.
effective way. Yeah, that's kind of my whole philosophy with coaching. And yeah, that's just Catherine, so my partner and also athlete, obviously that coach. And that was just her transformation. So on the left there, that was her in January at the end of her bulk where she got a bit fluffy. Um, quite fluffy, I would say. And then that was basically mid prep, I believe, like in September. And then that her on the far right was her winning her pro card in wellness.
Yeah, great
And that's
physique,
just
man.
the
Congrats.
Thank you. And that's sort of the glute development. And again, like I said, I'm very happy to detail like everything that I sort of did, because I'm truly believe in like sharing information. I'm not one of those guys who like to gatekeep stuff. So
Oh
I'm
yeah.
an open book when it comes to stuff. And yeah, I think I did things in, I wouldn't say a unique way, but I definitely applied some principles, which I think paid off, which worked better than expected. But yeah, dude, it was a wild ride.
Yeah, man. No, that's awesome. I mean, that's about the main thing is doing it for as long as possible, right? Because we all love it. So,
Mhm.
as you said, you're trying to do it with then 10, obviously achieving their goals. Like athletes, when they hire you, they want to win. That's all they want.
Correct.
So they're willing to sacrifice a little bit of health. There is that trade-off.
Mhm.
But when it comes to like selecting the coach, the best coach for you,
Mhm.
I would say like for us, it's very important to keep that in mind. Hey, we want this person to be with us for the longest period of time. We don't want them to win a show and then stop competing, either because they didn't like us or because we fuck their health and they can't do it no more. So it's all about longevity. It's all about trying to minimize the risks and do it as safe as possible. And with that
Mhm.
comes having a proper nutrition, having a decent cycle, not abusing substances and all that, and just trying to acquire knowledge as we do it. And guys, be humble and willing to learn
Mhm.
from each other, because I feel like most of the coaches in Brazil, at least, they're a little bit stubborn. They don't want to
Mhm.
listen to other people. They feel like they know all the answers. Whatever they done in the past is what matters. Their experience is the most important thing ever, and sometimes science doesn't even matter. So we're here to try to change it. Obviously, with with we know that we don't have enough data, enough like evidence to base everything on science, but
Mhm.
that's at least how we like to do things. That's how I met you and Kodam. I was doing some
Mhm.
YouTube research on insulin and GH, and then you both pop up, and I was like, "Damn, these guys are pretty smart." And then I started to watch the lives and stuff, and that's how we met. I would say I was
Mhm.
literally on every single live on
Yeah.
Friday, because like when you guys are recording, it's in the EA, like it's 8 a.m.
Yeah.
for you, right? For me,
Yes.
it's like
Yes.
8 p.m. So I was already
Right.
like preparing to go to bed, so it would be just like the perfect timing for me to watch it.
Yep. Yep.
And I was there on the comments, and I think like two lives ago, I asked the question like, so
Mhm.
is bulking useless now? And then we had this idea to connect and have this
Mhm.
podcast.
Mhm.
So we're
Mhm.
essentially gonna go over how to properly build muscle, because apparently
Mhm.
you don't have to bulk anymore. Right, a
Yeah.
surplus is not necessary. You can do it without like having to eat a shit ton of food. That's
Mhm.
apparently what we got to do now. Is we got a main
Mhm.
game is the new trend. So
Yes.
for
Yes.
now, I would like to get your ideas, get your insights on how to properly build muscle and
Mhm.
have like a one-on-one, like from the beginning to the end, and then maybe if we have a part two, like switch to the prep phase when you
Of
go
course.
and try to get leaner and stage ready.
Yes. No. Definitely.
So
So
I
yeah.
would say the
So
first
yeah.
question I have is, do we need a bulk or not?
Do any of both. I guess it's interesting because I mean, for those who aren't familiar, the reason why sort of a lot of this stuff popped up is there's an individual called, I think her handle is Scientific Snitch on Instagram. She's obviously in English, so many of you may not be familiar with her, but she basically brought up some very interesting points about how a caloric surplus is not needed. Now, I'm not going to try butcher what she says because she says a lot of different things. And to us, we have a fair few questions for her. Colton did have a live with her, but we're supposed to have a second follow-up where I've got a bunch of questions. But essentially what she's saying, it was my understanding of it, is that I think she calls it like almost a projected maintenance, or rather she's saying that it's 1 to
Mhm.
100, it's 100 to 200 calories, which I would define as a surplus, but she would define as maintenance that you grow into. And that's all required to put on muscle. And I would agree, but I sort of reverse engineer it with the way I think about how to gain muscle. What I mean by that is, personally, I think trying to calculate your maintenance is a waste of time. So you could sit there
Really?
going, okay, well, my expenditure is that, I'm looking at a BMR calculator online. Okay, I think it's that. So instead, I like to base it off more tangible metrics like what is your training performance like? What is your average rate of gain? And what are the visuals looking like? And this is literally one of the ways I coach, or some of the variables I look at. So breaking that down, when I start with a new client, obviously I try to look at any historical data that they have on their nutrition. Let's say they're a clean slate, they don't know anything about anything, and they're just a bodybuilder who's somewhat advanced, not a beginner, so we can discount beginner gains here. So they're somewhat advanced bodybuilder, but they've just been bro sciencing it, and they've just been eating a lot of protein, they don't know the macros. So someone like that, I would set like initial target amount of calories in protein somewhere from maybe 1 gram to 1.3 grams, depending on a number of factors there, but usually about 1 to 1.2 grams per pound, somewhere around there.
Per pound. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, per pound,
so
not a kilo.
So per kilo, guys, that would be like a 2.0, 2.5 grams per kilo.
About anywhere from like 2.2 to like 2.6, somewhere around there. I'd like to. I'll try not to go into too many tangents, but I try to slightly overshoot protein. We know PDs can increase muscle protein synthesis, but there's incorrect food labels, there's incorrect measurements people can make on scale. So usually I like to slightly increase protein, even during a surplus phase, as long as the athlete doesn't have digestive issues. So someone if does have digestive issues, sometimes I'll lower protein, so like even 1 gram per pound. And if they have excessive body fat, sometimes even 0.8 gram per pound, because remember, this is based on lean mass. So if you're 300 pounds overweight, you're not going to need 300 plus grams of protein necessarily.
Definitely not.
But yeah, so I'll basically give them, an amount which I think would roughly be their maintenance, and basically just track their weight. So track it on a daily basis and see how it's averaging out. Track their strength in the gym. And if I see that their performance in the gym is increasing, and they're gaining even staying the same weight or gaining anywhere from 0 to 0.5% of their total body mass on average per week. So the reason is I get a lot of different weigh-ins to get their average weight. Because remember, guys, things like change your fluid intake, change your electrolyte intake, your digestion, all of that can affect your weight on the scale. So if you're only doing 1 or 2 weigh-ins, you might be bloated from the day before. Oh, I've gained 1 kilo. I'm going too far. So I always recommend tracking your average weight. But anyway, I'll get that average weight and see if the trend is like they are slowly progressing. I'll combine that with comparison photos to visually see, do they look like they're getting softer? Obviously, that is my perception, and that takes a bit of experience, because it is difficult looking at someone and being like, okay, they're getting fatter, But if you work with someone enough and you've done enough check-ins, I think you can start visually able to see that. So I will compare what they're visually looking like with what I'm seeing objectively on their rates of gain, and what I'm seeing with their training performance is like. And basically, if those are all improving, I know I'm eating enough. So I don't personally go, okay, is this a 100 calorie surplus? Is this a 200 calorie surplus? Is this a 500 calorie surplus? Because I am in agreement with it. Exactly. I have a lot because I don't think it's feasible to accurately calculate.
Yeah, it's impossible.
Yes. So, I mean, there's a lot of good information out there about, Dr. Eric Helms, if you guys are familiar with him. Anyway, he's a great PhD researcher, and he's put up a lot of good information on naturals, where I think, if I recall correctly, the study was they put some individuals on 500 calorie surplus and then the rest in like a 200 to 300 calorie surplus. I believe, I could be getting the exact numbers wrong, but effectively, it was a much larger surplus, a much smaller surplus. We found even in natural lifters that the ones on the 500 calorie surplus had excessive fat gain. Maybe indicating, I want to say maybe because nothing's definitive, but maybe indicating that, higher calorie surpluses are not needed. And I have to tend to agree with that, but I don't look at it, is this person in a 500 calorie surplus? I look at it, what is their appropriate rate of gain? Now, a few caveats I have to say here, because some of you might be thinking, well, Adam, what if I start using insulin? What if I start using growth hormone? What if I change the dose of the PEDs? And you're all correct there, because increasing the dose of anabolics, you can have additional glycogen supercompensation. So you basically store more muscle glycogen. Introducing growth hormone for the first time or escalating the dose can have a similar effect with additional fluid and glycogen retention, which can all make your weight fluctuate. But that goes back to my original point, which is like why I like to track average weight. And if I see like a spike in weight, sometimes I'll even omit that reading. A client might say to me, oh, it was my birthday, I had a cheat meal, there was a lot of sodium in it. I might just omit that weigh-in to not skew the data that much. And that is the way that I can sort of see that they're basically adding weight at the appropriate rate, so they're not getting too fat, but we know that we're progressing. And that's kind of the way I look at bulking, because it's more outcome driven. Because I say, because if you sit there, in my opinion, and like try to calculate, okay, I think it's a 1 to 200 calorie surplus, let's pretend that you did get it accurate, but if you're not getting stronger in the gym, you're not seeing any sort of visual differences, you're not seeing the scale weight slowly trending upwards, you're probably not gaining muscle. So
No,
I'd rather have
definitely not.
more objective measures.
Because, like, let's be honest, what is 100 calories? It's like an extra banana. So, what if you walk an extra 1,000 steps a day? It's like, how do you calculate your maintenance calories then? It's actually impossible. So, her claim is that building muscle is not calorie dependent. It's not energy dependent. It's
Yes.
it's what is it called? It's
Yeah, I can explain this
it
one too.
basically depends on the training. As it depends on mechanical tension. Okay, that's a fair statement. But then, what about when you're on PDs and stuff? There's another. I feel like there's another pathway that also stimulates protein synthesis. So, like, you can put on muscle and not do anything if you're on PD. So that changes everything. But then going back to the calories and all that. So she says that she doesn't uses daily calories. She uses the average of the week. And then she divides that. So she's essentially predicting the future, I guess. Because, like, how do you estimate how many calories you're going to burn throughout the week? It's kind of impossible. So I 100% agree with you. It's like there's no actual point of trying to calculate the calories. Is much more precise to base that on the visuals and just watch your progression at the gym. But we skip the point because, like, for her, and I 100% agree with that. For you to start a bulk, for you to start like a muscle building process, you got to be lean enough. You can be fat, and you can be extremely in a calorie deficit, extremely lean. So how do you define, like, what is an appropriate body fat for you to start a bulk? Just based on visuals?
Not necessarily. So again, let's pretend this is like a new client who's come to me and they are an intermediate to more advanced bodybuilder. Okay. I'll use that example because, again, I want to, like, rule out beginner gains and you're tracking errors and stuff that you typically get with beginners. So using that as sort of baseline, I would obviously get their visual photos, basically their mandatory poses, look at that. And then I would also get a comprehensive look at their blood work. So I would like to look at their HbA1c. I would like to look at their insulin sensitivity, their HOMA-IR, what their fasting glucose is. Then ask them about their digestion, ask them basically what their current intake is like. And based on a combination of all of those, I will define whether I think they need to go into a deficit phase and shed some body fat or continue on with a surplus. And for the most part, if I don't see, like, blood glucose, is the unit of measurement in Brazil milligrams per deciliter. So, like, between, okay, cool. So, okay, cool. I'm getting good with all the different units of measurements around the world.
There's no way you can do that in America, dude. It's impossible. They're always going to change something.
Yeah. But basically keeping it between like a 70 and a 90, somewhere in that range, which I would define as like pretty insulin sensitive. HbA1c, I would say similar thing, 90 or rather like a 5 or below, depending what unit measurement you're looking at. But basically look at those markers and then define whether the individual needs to go into long deficit, a mini cut, or basically continue on with a surplus. And even with my surpluses, this is where I probably agree with the scientific extension, because I base it on outcomes. I probably do have most of my athletes in a 200 to 300 surplus. If I were to estimate, I always do say slight surplus, because I'm not looking for an excessive rate of gain. Because when we see excessive rates of gain, most of the time, I think Justin Harris speaks about this a fair bit when he talks about muscle protein synthesis and how much muscle you can actually synthesize over the course of the day. Exactly. And if you're having this excessive rate of gain, I've seen a lot of guys, post show with like, oh, look how much muscle I put on. I put on 40 pounds, and it's like, bro, you have a
you're just
yeah. So you haven't put on 40 pounds muscle, bro, in 8 weeks. So I'll probably tend to agree with her in the sense that only a really slight, for lack of a better term, I'll call it surplus, is required, because if you are following a steady rate of gain, you will basically have to be in a slight surplus. If you are eating 500 to 1,000 calories in a surplus, you'll probably be getting fatter. You're probably holding a fair bit of water. Your insulin sensitivity will probably start degrading pretty fast. You'll probably be bloated, probably have digestion issues.
And look like shit.
Yeah, and look like shit. So I think if you think of it at least in the way I do, you naturally will have guys or girls in, a slight deficit. That's typically what I see.
Mm-hmm. No, I 100% agree. Most of the times when someone comes to us, they're not that lean that they can't start a bulk. So that they can be leaner. I mean, they can always be a little leaner. So I always like to start like with a slight calorie deficit, because what study shows is that you can continue to build muscle up until a 500 calorie deficit, because as long as you're getting your protein in and you have enough energy to produce enough ATP, you're good to go. So below 500, that's way too much. That's too aggressive. And then after that, just do a reverse diet and try to find the new maintenance. And then maybe add 100 calories, 200 calories to that, and keep on going. But I don't really track anything. But for my clients, at least, I also get because I mean, the way that we coach is, I don't know if you base your model sort of like what John Joey does, which is based on daily check-ins. So like their daily weight, how their day was going, the amount of hours they slept that night, and all that. And then after a week or so, 2 weeks, whatever, you provide them with the feedback. Is that how you do it, based on like daily changes, and then you have like a weekly feedback or a bi-weekly feedback?
So it really depends on who the athlete is, assuming that they're a competitor, serious bodybuilder. Comparing where they are, if they're in a prep or an off-season phase. At the minimum, I provide athletes weekly feedback, and I have basically big data sheets where, I track all those metrics. I track weight, I track steps, I track calories inputted. I do things via chronometer, so I also go deep into their diet, looking at the macronutrients, micronutrients, fiber intake, electrolytes, etc. I'll track, like I said, sleep. I'll track their training. And a bunch of other, data which sort of all falls under those sort of categories. And then based on the feedback they give me in the check-in, I will then make adjustments. But also I have all my clients on like a separate coaching WhatsApp. So sometimes I will make adjustments on the fly, especially if it's related to like side effects of blood work. Like when blood work comes in, I almost like immediately will look at that, scroll through that, make sure everything's okay, and make some adjustments off of that. And that's sort of how I keep progressing things.
Yeah, no, that's pretty smart. It's like we need data if we want to change something. So that's how we work. But in Brazil, normally they just do a bi-weekly feedback based on the form that they ask the athlete or the person to complete. So it's basically a questionnaire with like 10 questions, 15 questions that they got to provide with pictures to the coach, and then they give the feedback with the adjustments and everything, normally on a PDF or on WhatsApp. They don't give a phone call. They usually they don't even see their faces. It's just a photo, and that's about it. And that's very inaccurate. That there's no way you can do this sort of thing that we are talking about here, which is literally watching the details and trying to like keep this person as lean as possible while they're building the most amount of muscle as possible, because they don't have enough data. They literally lack the resources to do that. So if you're trying to do this, you have to measure literally everything. You get not everything regarding like your calories, but at least you gotta be able to track stuff. And if you don't, there's no point of trying to hire a coach that is unable to do that.
Yes. And this is maybe like where, my background sort of as a chartered accountant comes in, because I kind of leverage a lot of that into bodybuilding, where, to give it an analogy or give an example, like I had to create, in Excel and a lot of spreadsheets, we had to create like financial models. We had to look at a lot of data analytics on companies to basically inform how decisions were made. And through that sort of experience, I applied this to myself and before I even advertised my services, because I said I've been coaching for a decade, but I only was advertising my services as a proper coach probably the last 2 years or so. So technically, does that mean I want a pro card in 2 years of yes, in 2 years of coaching? Maybe, but that's not completely true. I have been coaching pro bono, I guess, for a longer period of time. But even before I advertised my services, I used a lot of data to always inform things, because the way I saw it is there's a lot of subjectivity in bodybuilding, a lot of subjectivity.
Exactly.
So how can I make it as objective as possible? How can I inform my decisions? Because I don't want to be looking at my clients and going like, okay, I think
I guess.
I guess, or I think training is improving. And so what I did is anything that I could distill into data or into objective numbers, I do, because I base most of my coaching decisions, or a lot of it, do I have data on it? Can this decision supported by data? Often, sometimes it's not. Often, sometimes it's a combination of learning the client and experience. But if I can make any of it objective, that's what I try to do. So correct, like I do have check-in forms myself, but they sort of just are additional detail explaining the data. So if I see someone's average sleep tanking, I have a question about like, what is your, rapid eye movement? What is your deep sleep like? What is your sleep duration and quality like? And they might, say some shit like, oh, it was very stressful this week, I couldn't sleep. And the deep sleep is poor. Maybe we have to look into some supplementation around like L-theanine, melatonin, or something like that to improve sleep. That could just be something that gives me additional information about why that number looks that way. So that's kind of how my check-in forms work, where it's like provide an explanation as to why these numbers potentially look like the way they do. And then what I would do is I provide, so I do my check-ins. It's quite common these days. I use Loom, which is, if people aren't familiar, it's just a recording software where I will go through all their data sort of with them on the video. What I mean by that is I'll go through their form, speaking towards them, going through their data, because I want to show them. I don't want anyone to just trust me because of who I am, or trust me just because I'm a coach or something like this. Like, correct. Not that I have any sort of name, but rather that I know people put a lot of trust in their coaches, and that can be good, but at the same time, I don't see it that way. I see it as you trust me because I'm being very transparent, and I'm saying, this is what I'm seeing. This is my thought process. This is why I'm making these adjustments. So with my whole coaching process with all my clients, and I guess also that's why I probably coach a lot of coaches. I think, I have a cap of around 30 competitors and 20 lifestyle clients. I never really go about 50 clients, pretty much around there at this point in time. But I would say at least 25 of my clients are coaches themselves. And I guess at least the feedback that I've got is I try to be as educational as I can. When I do coach people, I'm saying, this is your data. This is this is what it's presenting. This is why I'm making those changes. And the way I build trust with my athletes is not being like, trust me, I'm gonna get you the result. It's like, here's my thought process. This is why I'm making this adjustment. So you can see it. Do you have any questions, or do you want to know further about this? Like why I've added a DHT derivative, whatever the adjustment is.
What is a DHT derivative? I try to explain things exactly like you do. Sometimes I even pull up the research to fact prove myself. I'm like, hey, I know what I'm saying, because like if people look at your physique, they're gonna be like, oh, this guy trains, this guy like, he looks like a bodybuilder. But if people look at me, they're like, oh, that's just a fit guy. Like, does he knows what he's saying? So I try to base literally everything on science and on experience to give me that credibility. And sometimes what happens is people market themselves way too well on Instagram. So then they don't really got to do this. They can skip through the edges and just be like, hey, trust me, I know what I'm doing. I don't have to explain why. It's like, just do this. And then what happens is sometimes the client follows the protocol, the magic, and they fuck with their health. But guess what? You're looking good, at least. But if you just want to look good, well, just take a shit ton of steroids, right? It's that's gonna make you look good fast. I'm gonna get my money, and you're gonna lose your health, but you're gonna get your pretty visuals.
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of people, unfortunately, do fall into that trap where they, make a correlation between someone's physique and their level of knowledge. I mean, the best example I can give, again, these guys won't know them, but we were talking about a good friend of mine, and obviously I'm biased, but his name's Luis Barrel, the Prep Dad on Instagram. I think he's the best French coach, in my opinion. What he's done with clients, number of pro cards he's won. He coaches a guy named Florian Poisson. Some of the guys might know Florian. He's basically, I think he's going to get his Olympia invite, but like a really high level competitor. And Luis, doesn't look, by I guess objective standards, doesn't look like a bodybuilder. But man, there isn't a course, a book, a program, a seminar this guy has not done. Okay, and he's someone I definitely consult with, frequently. Tremendous friend. But anyway, it's funny because people sometimes would make that assumption about him, but I'm like, you do realize this is probably in my opinion, one of the best coaches that you can speak to, and that's why I always say, if someone is necessarily a bit shady about their process, where they don't necessarily want to explain things, or they can't explain things, or they just show the outcome. For me personally, as a coach, my advice is, to athletes, that's a red flag. Now, I'm not saying a coach has to post their clients' protocols or sensitive information, but if any coach that you're looking into, if you ask them questions and they can't give you a reasonable explanation, or even if they say, hey, I'm not too sure, but I'll get back to you on that, then that is a red flag, because I think hopefully the days are gone, or at least slowly fading away, where it's a question of, trust the process, look at what I did with X athlete. Because quite frankly, I don't care what you did with the other athlete. How can you give me a logical answer to my situation right now?
Before pressing record, we were talking about that. Like, if you get a guy who is genetically blessed, anyone can coach them. Literally, imagine you get Ronnie Coleman. You can do anything. That guy's gonna get results. So, what's the point of just trusting a person because of what they did with X, Y, Z? Is like, no, you got to trust that person because you think at least that the person has some sort of knowledge and is able to not only give you the results, but explain the whys. So that's very important, at least for me, to have a good off season. Because like we were saying, off season ain't that hard. I mean, not off season, but building muscle in the sense of making adjustments to the plan. All you got to do is figure out your maintenance calories, eat a little bit above that, and train hard, and keep assessing your visuals and being honest with your coach. But you got to do that for a long period of time. And if you lack the communication with your coach, or if your coach lacks the communication, which is like, there's no way it's actually going to work, because someone's going to give up. It's either you are going to give up or the coach. So that's very important for me, collecting data. That's where I wanted to get at. So to continue with the conversation. So if you're natural, you would say a slight 100, 200 calories of a surplus after you figure out your maintenance calories. Just watch your visuals and keep training hard, keep progressing. That's it, right?
I think the easiest for us to make it even easier, because as we stated, many people are going to be like, what's the 100, 200 calorie surplus? What's my maintenance? I'll make it very easy for you. Track your food, track your macros, track your total caloric intake, weigh yourself as frequently as you can, ideally daily, fast in the morning. Get the average for each week of that weight. So let's say you're 80 kilos. The next week you are 80.4. See what the percentage increase is. So if it's between like 0.25 to 0.5% increase in total body weight, plus your lifts are going up in the gym, that's a pretty good rate of gain. If you're natural, there's no other variables going to throw it off. That's what I would typically shoot for. It's not a hard and fast rule, but I would say if there's slight progression in weight to about 1 to 2% per month total body weight. So if you're 80, you're going to go to almost 81. So it's not a lot. 1% is going to be 80.8, 800 grams. So if you're sitting at the end of the month at around 81, your lifts are slowly going up. You're increasing reps and load. That's it. So bodybuilding can be, quite simple to do the basics. And I feel like a lot of coaches, myself included, I'm definitely guilty of this, get into the pretty nuanced stuff, which is not applicable to most people. It's more applicable in nuance, in very niche, situations for competitors. But for the majority of people, I think we have all this information these days, and I'm not going to tangent about this one, because we were speaking about like the era I came for previously, where I've been bodybuilding like 15 years. There was like forums and no information back in the day, and everyone was natural. I still remember Jay Cutler, Celtec.
Yeah, GH15 wasn't it?
Yeah, GH15, exactly. So now to where we have so much information, it's kind of hard to read through it. And this is feedback I get from a lot of clients, like, Adam, do I do this? Do I do this? Do I this? So what about this? What about this? In fact, I just get clients often who just send me shit on Instagram or send it to me on WhatsApp. Be like, what do you think about this? I'm like, okay, this is a very small snippet of being a conversation. But anyway, what I'm trying to get at is that like the fundamentals for you to progress, guys, it's not is super complex. As you're saying, average weight of gain, eat enough protein, okay, progressively overload in the gym. You do that, you will gain muscle. Like
you're good to go. The problem is that people are impatient. They can't accept the fact of being bored. It's like, hey, it's gonna take a long time for you to put on mass, to put on real muscle, to put tissue. They want to see the scale going up. So that's the problem. That's why they say eat big to get big, because they want to see the scale go up daily.
Yes.
They want to go to the gym and have a huge pump. They want to put a shirt on and have their arm tight. But that's just water and fat tissue. It's like to build muscle is going to require at least 6 months, a proper phase of building muscle at least, would you say? How long should it last? It's like up until the competition is coming.
As long as possible. So again, so this is again goal dependent. So I'm going to base this on a competitor who wants to gain as much muscle as possible. Me personally, this is the way I view it. I try to keep all my athletes in a gaining phase as long as possible. Now, this doesn't mean getting too fat. This doesn't mean ignoring things. Well, I say long as possible because I'm not going to cut a circuit. So I base when we go into a mini cut or deficit phase based on, well, either we have a competition, we need prep, or health markers like insulin sensitivity, like blood pressure, like resting heart rate, like digestion. Okay, some of these markers are off, which may indicate body fat is too high, which may indicate we need to go to a mini cut. But if an athlete has all those good markers in check and they're progressing and they want to get as much muscle as possible, which is the assumption here, why would I take them out of that surplus?
Why would you?
So I've had, exactly. So I've had like many, Kat's a good example. Man, she was in a surplus for almost 2 years, basically, with a couple mini cuts here and there, basically to get things moving along. In fact, that initial photo with her in January, she got that fluffy because I knew that we were going to go into prep soon, so I pushed the body fat a bit higher than we typically need to, and also because I have historical data on her and she loses body fat pretty quickly, I know that would be fine. So I can get into that, and that's a whole other conversation. But anyway, the point is, yes, I try to keep them in a surplus as long as possible. It's sort of like a reactive deload. So before I go on another tangent, if people are familiar with deload, it's basically a session where a training period where of lighter training, you try to drop systemic fatigue. It's a sort of the same thing with being in a surplus or gaining phase. As long as those health markers and other, different physiological markers like insulin sensitivity are in range and you're gaining at a good rate, you're getting strong in the gym, why would you stop that? So I would continue that as long as possible. So I don't go like, okay, we're going to do a 16-week bulk, we're going to do a 12-week cut. Not at all. Everything that I base with my athletes is completely reactive and based on reactive, reactive basically.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. So what the question that comes to my mind is when to make adjustments. If it only requires a slight surplus, how do I know when I got to increase the doses, when I got to increase the food? What do I increase first? The food, the PDs, what do I do? Is like, how do you make that decision?
Just CC every week. No, I got to be careful here because I say a lot of like 5% rich piano stuff, and a lot of people take me seriously on that, and I'm like, oh shit.
Yo, they will take you serious in Brazil if you talk about dosages. Hey, just take a little bit more, right?
yeah. Like I know. That's common, but correct question, man. But so when it comes to what I make adjustments on, so like I said, I do weekly feedback. So most of the time, especially in off season, it'll probably be weekly adjustments. Like I said, sometimes there'll be ad hoc adjustments if they're in a prep. Like prep is completely different to off season for me. I almost sometimes have daily checking with clients. And one thing that you touched on previously is that, and this is something, guys, you should also look for in a coach, in my opinion, is the reason I cap my clients is because I have a very high level of communication. What I mean by that is I have a separate coaching WhatsApp, which only has my clients on it. And I tell them response time is within 24 hours. Realistically, it's way quicker than that. And the reason I do that is because I need to know a lot of information, a lot of these competitors. Like if someone is having digestive issues on a Monday, I don't want to find out in the check-in on the Saturday and they couldn't eat the whole week. So message, I always say, if you experience anything at any time, you message me immediately. I have clients around the world, so I tell them, don't give a shit about the time zone, just message me. I literally roll out of bed and start answering messages. A bit sad, but that's kind of how I operate. But anyway, so I will provide that weekly feedback, but I'll do sometimes provide ad hoc adjustments based on what they say to me. But anyway, in that weekly feedback, if everything is going well, sometimes I do the check-in and go, man, there's no changes to be made. I'm not going to make a change. I'm not going to make a change for the sake of making a change. I might talk to them about future plans or other aspects because I always want to provide value in my check-ins. But often I'll be like, yeah, there's nothing actually to change this week. Dude, PDs, everything stayed the same. But to answer your question now, when do I make those adjustments? Okay, so let's say I've got an athlete and their lifts have stagnated and their weights are stagnated. Typically, I will look at progressing food if their insulin sensitivity is good and if they're not, pushing that quite high. If I haven't made the adjustment first, so I will always look to, progress food if appropriate. Body fat, if they're not visually getting soft in the gym, so I'll basically, when I say soft in the gym, their visuals aren't getting softer. So, for example, if I increase food and their insulin sensitivity gets worse, maybe goes from like an 88 to a 91 or 92, okay. Then I will look at, okay, maybe we need to adjust PED load. And PED load obviously would be dependent on the athlete, but typically I don't increase, anabolics by more than 100, 200 milligrams max per week. It's not really big adjustments that I typically would make. And also, depending on the anabolic, usually if we're using like a testosterone, a DHT derivative, think Maestron or Primobolan, it will probably be an increase in like the same ratio, because what I would try to do is dial in their estradiol based on how much aromatizing compound versus DHT derivative they can handle, and usually I'll increase it in that same ratio. So let's say it's like a 2-to-1 ratio. I will increase that 100 milligrams will be in a 2-to-1, so to sort of keep their hormone level stable. But anyway, I'll make that PD adjustment if we're finding that the food increase is resulting in them visually getting quote unquote softer, a degradation in the insulin sensitivity, and they're not seeing any performance increases in the gym. Now, this is where things can get like a bit complicated. Imagine this like giant decision tree, because, for example, they may not be progressing in the gym because they've also been training 12 plus weeks or whatever the time frame is, and maybe they need to deload. I'll also look at other factors like what is their recovery like? Is their sleep poor? Are they suddenly having a huge drop in their REM sleep? Is their digestion poor? So I sort of try to eliminate all the other variables which could be halting their progression. Stress, exactly. That's good. Before I say, okay, increase PEDs. Like, honestly, PEDs is usually the last thing I will make an adjustment on before checking off all the other boxes. That's why the data collection part is so important, because even with the adjustments I make, I think, hey, I'm extrapolating data here and I'm making an educated assumption of what I think. I'm not saying this is 100% accurate, but I'm saying on the probabilities, I think this is what it is. So it's wild to me.
Based on something, right?
Yeah, it's wild to me when people can make adjustment with like minimal data and be like, yeah, we need to increase PDs. And
that's like, fucking insane. Yeah, sometimes
based on what, dude?
It's like, yo, we're gonna decrease 2,000 steps this week instead of increasing food. That's about it.
Yeah, that's a good example. If I have an athlete who's really, really lean, who's averaging a fair bit of steps, who maybe has an active job, that's something I do too. I say, dude, reduce steps. Like, chill a bit more. I want you doing I don't want you averaging 15K, hit like 12K or like 13K. And that's something I will look to too. So, I wish I could give you like a completely straight answer. Be like, when I see this, I increase PDs, like, because it's never like that. It's usually a combination of variables where, like I said, I check for anything that could be impeding recovery or progression. Could be sleep, could be that they need a deload, could be the digestion and the nutritional intake. Most of the time bodybuilders are really good. They follow the nutrition plan, they track their stuff. So that usually it's not nutrition, but sometimes it can be. They're not digesting. Look at all those variables, then look at potential food increase. And if that's still not working in the following check-in, 100 to 200 milligram increase. I mean, most athletes who work with me, not all of them, but it's funny because most of the time their training load decreases because we already big on exercise execution and technique. I know you are too, so I try already dialing in the training. And then their PDs, I usually rejig that a fair bit, because I often get guys coming to me where their main form of progression hasn't been nutrition and diet, it's just been increasing the dose. And then they usually then they usually come to me when their health markers are skewed and they're not making progress. And the question is, why? I don't know, stop making progress. Why? And they're on like 1.5 grams, 2 grams sometimes of total anabolic load. They're big guys, and they have to kind of explain to them like, well, let's look at your training. Let's look at your diet. Okay. Let's look at your health markers. They don't know. Then I usually get it checked, and I say, well, let's get health markers to baseline, or at least improved. Let's get into sensitivity good. Let's track your training and objectively see if you're progressing. And then let's get your nutrition in check, and you'll find you need way, way less. So it's not with every athlete that I've onboarded, but like often their dosages get cut in half or even a third, and then we titrate from there.
That makes a lot of sense. So do you think you should take more PEDs during the bulk or during the cut? Because during the cut, you're just trying to sustain whatever you gain during the bulking phase.
But, man, I swear you are. Yeah.
There's that limit, because like you don't want to push too hard in the bulk, so then there's going to be too much inflammation and the health markers are going to be skewed, and then you can't go into a prep phase. So I would say, I mean, the way I like to work at least is find the minimum effective dose, and then if you got to increase, just be very smart and cautious about it with the drug that is the least harmful. So you're not going to be using trenbolone during an off season. So and then from that you can switch the not necessarily the dosages, but the compound to switch to a prep phase.
So great question. I swear, like you reading all my future prepared videos. That question you asked me is just a video I shot yesterday. But to answer that question, in general, yes, I'll find a surplus phase that you typically will have higher overall anabolic load. Reason being is the amount of total PEDs. Now, when I refer to PEDs, I'm just talking about anabolics. We can talk about GH and insulin independently or after. I treat them quite differently to overall anabolic load, which is, think of it.
It is different. It's separate. We count with IUs, not milligrams.
So in terms of total anabolic load during a surplus phase, typically that is where I'll use higher doses as needed. As you said, the minimum effective dose to progress, which will be different for many individuals. Okay, relatively speaking, someone's dose may be high, someone's dose may be low. It depends what they need to progress and how advanced they are. But anyway, I would do, as you said, the minimum effective dose and titrate that during an off-season phase. That probably gets higher because this is where we're trying to build muscle. Now, many individuals think, during a deficit phase or prep phase, I need to use more. And I would say there is a little bit of rationale behind that, because I understand a lot of guys try to grow into the show. And because we know that, one of the drivers of hypertrophy is mechanical tension. And before I go into it, it's basically about satellite cell proliferation. If there is enough mechanical tension applied, the satellite cells have growth factors released, which trigger them to donate their nuclei to the muscle fibers, which make them bigger. Anyway, I probably butchered that explanation, but very fast explanation.
That's pretty good.
In a very fast explanation of that. And if you have enough, PEDs and you're progressing with your training, you can actually grow a bit in a deficit. But what I say to individuals is it's not worth the PED load to try do that for the most part. There is circumstances where I'll explain how I actually do that. But for the most part, if you are, let's say that your maintenance dose of anabolics that you need to retain tissue for you is maybe between like 500 and 1,000 milligrams. Okay? And I'll sort of explain how to find that maintenance dose. If you're taking 2 to 3 grams and you're 8 weeks out hoping to gain more muscle, you're probably just going to get more side effects. You're probably going to cost yourself more money and a great detriment to your health markers, which is going to affect your prep, affect you to do more preps, and affect your long-term ability to bodybuild. So I almost say it's almost never worth it. But this is where I give the caveat, and I say in my prep approach with most of my clients, there is a part of prep where I'll have a slightly higher PED load. And what I typically do is, if they transition from an off-season to a maintenance to a prep phase, I will actually keep the PED load relatively the same from the off-season. The question is, why do you do that? Well, because what I touched on previously is that you can build muscle in a slight caloric deficit, which is something that I think now we have a lot more data on, sort of what I touched on previously, because hypertrophy, a lot of it is derived from mechanical tension and your ability to recover from that. If you're able to progressively overload in the beginning stages of prep, and I see this with a lot of my athletes where maybe for the first anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks, depending on how lean they are, what their PED load is like, etc., we are able to progressively overload. And in that period, I'll keep their off-season PEDs pretty much relatively the same during that prep phase. And often I will find that I can't objectively say they've built muscle. I know 100%. But what I can say is all their training performance has increased. They've PR'd on all their lifts. Their training performance has increased. And I basically pushed that into the point where they can't progress anymore. And we've had a deload and a can't increase. Then at that point, and usually it correlates with, you know, food coming down. At that point, I will drop their PEDs to baseline levels. And the reason, like I said, the whole thought process behind that is to try get them to grow into the show, or at least milk out a bit more of muscle mass in the beginning phase.
That makes a lot of sense, but then that requires really smart programming when it comes to training, because
yes.
then when you decrease the dosages, you can manage that by decreasing the muscle damage that you're causing at the gym. So you can perhaps try to decrease the training volume, because now they're not trying to build anything, they're just trying to maintain it.
Right.
So if they keep on doing the same training volume with the same intensity that they were doing during the peak of their off season, probably they're going to lose muscle, because now they're doing a lot of cardio as well. So you got to be really smart about the training. How do you manage that, like this transition? Because if you want to keep your client progressing in a calorie deficit, now the person is going to have less energy to spend at the gym, maybe less willingness to train, is feeling more tired overall. It's like, how are they going to do that if they are still training the same way as they were like peak off season on a calorie surplus?
Yes, great point. So during that, so to cover the training aspect, during that, you know, initial prep phase, when the PED load hasn't been dropped yet, when it's still basically similar to what we had in the off season, I will progress their training, ensuring that they're progressively overloading each week. Increase. So when it comes to training volume, now those total working sets, I will track the total working sets per each muscle group. Okay. So I've created basically this training spreadsheet or log for myself, where my athletes just basically log their lifts, and it calculates the total volume. And what I would do is, depending on what muscle group we're trying to bring up, so let's just assume they have nothing to bring up and they're just symmetrical and they're great and everything's good. I will slowly increase their volume based on what their perceived maximum recoverable volume is. So if anyone guys are familiar with like the models put up by Reynolds periodization, you know, this is basically what they speak about, where I look at what is the maximum recoverable volume that they can recover from, i.e. what is the total number of working sets per muscle group that they can recover from. And I basically try to keep it at MRV. Usually for advanced guys, it's only like maybe one muscle group.
One or two.
The upper, so one or two, maybe one in the lower, okay, because we can't have everything at MRV because you'll have too much systemic fatigue, but that's another consideration. But anyway, I will progress or keep it around MRV, maximum recoverable volume, which may include like a set increase here and there. So I'm not similar to RP in the sense that I know, again, it's individual dependent, but they might have a greater set progression, where in other words, each week they might increase total volume. Whereas I look at their lifts, you know, is the athlete's lifts increasing in terms of load repetitions? And I'll also have them give me feedback, which is again their perception on what their recovery is like. So I basically say to them, okay, do you feel that you're over recovered, under recovered, and under recovered? I define over recovered as in like a day before the next time you train that muscle group, you could have trained again, it felt very fresh. I would say like under recovered is that when you got to that next training session, so let's say you did chest Monday, you're doing it again on Thursday, for example, in that Thursday session, were you unable to match last week's lifts? In other words, you regressed. And then adequately recovered would be you recovered like just in time for that next training session of that muscle group, and you were able to progress. So if they report to me that they are under recovered, in other words, there was regression, which I can then check on their training data to see that there was regression, I would say, okay, we're basically pushing volume too much, and I will look at slightly decreasing volume. So I kind of want to keep them at the point where they are just adequately recovered. And that's how I base their total volume. So going back to the whole prep phase, in the initial phase, I will keep them at maximum recoverable volume or around maximum recoverable volume for those body parts they're trying to bring up or emphasize. Then we will get to the point where basically they either need to deload or progression is starting to slow or stagnate. At that point, we will probably have a deload. We'll reassess their training, maybe shift some movements around, maybe going from some more free weight to machine-based movements, just because it might be, you know, more stable, less systemically fatiguing. Not that free weights are bad during a prep, but there might be some
just harder to stabilize, right? Requires more energy.
Yeah, exactly. So just some slight alterations to their training. I have them do like what I call a training cycle review form, where they basically fill out this long form about their training. What is good? What is bad? What can we improve on? yeah, so basically I take their feedback and my own feedback to make adjustments to their training going forward. So it constantly gets like optimized. I mean, to make sure that, you know, it's the best for them, so to speak. But at that point, that's where you raised a really good point where, so I'll look at maybe dropping PEDs to what their maintenance load is, in other words, retained tissue. And that's when I'll pull back on their total training volume to be more around minimum effective volume, i.e. what would be the theoretical minimum effective volume where they could grow or maintain muscle mass. And at that point, usually volume stays pretty static, training volume, where I'll pull back a bit on overall training volume, maybe different for each athlete. And all I'm looking for at that point is that they can still either continue to slightly progress, like add a couple reps, add, you know, a bit of weight, or at least maintain their training performance.
At least maintain.
All the way, correct, all the way to about like, you know, anywhere from, you know, 2 to 4 weeks out. And at that period, again, depending on their recovery, depending on their fatigue levels, I will look at even maybe a further volume increase. I'm sorry, a volume decrease, depending on how high it was previously, because the amount of volume we need to maintain, I believe, is like roughly a third. Okay, so if you're keeping training intensity pretty high, you know, train to 0 to 1 reps in reserve, okay, somewhere around there, which is also another interesting topic, what people's perception is of reps in reserve. But we can maybe chat about that. Yeah, I'll tell you how I approach that, but that's a pretty, might be an interesting one. But anyway, if they keep in training intensity high, you don't need that much volume. So I mean, shit, like to give an example with Catherine, like some of her leg days was like, you know, 2 quad movements on a compound, like a hack squat, 2 leg extensions, and like that was it for quads. And
that's it. And that's what the research shows is like 4 to 6 sets per muscle group. That's what you need to build muscle. So if you just want to maintain your mass, literally 1 or 2 sets per session, you're good to go. As long as you're taking them with proximity to failure, which is the involuntary slow down of the movement. And then many people are afraid of getting there, and then they can use this sort of approach because they don't even know what failure is because they're scared of it. So that's where it comes the debate where, like, how do you gauge if you're 1 or 2 reps shy from failure if you don't even know what failure is.
Yes. And then also, like, just one other additional point to that, if they're female athletes, or if they're an athlete in a category with a certain muscle group isn't necessarily judged, think men's physique legs, think wellness in the upper body, I might even remove their lower body or upper body training completely, because when you're using PEDs, you're not really going to lose any size, or if you lose a bit of size, as soon as you start training it in the off season again, you will gain that. So the idea is, just for my wellness athletes, usually at some point during the prep, if they haven't stopped upper body training completely, I'll pull upper body training so they basically have more energy to expend on their leg training, and they can spend more time on things like maybe a bit of cardio, maybe a bit of steps, which is going to be more efficient to burning calories. I know a lot of people will be like, keep up body training. It's not, hypertrophy training isn't efficient at burning calories. So I'd rather them, pull back on something that they don't need to train, or really pull back the volume. Like, man, I think off season, Catherine's upper body volume was like 2 or 4 sets per week on like front delts, 2 sets on lats, 2 sets on like mid to upper back. That was it. And then prep was nothing. And, and she still maintained basically all the size in her upper body. And that typically allowed us to basically shift more energy, or more, I guess, fatigue capacity, so to speak, if you think of it that way, towards a lower body training to do more
protein synthesis and stuff.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, it's better to get more lean. So that's how I adjust training. So I do apologize. Everyone's like, man, this guy's going all over the place, but maybe that is how I do my coaching. It's a bit ADHD, where like I feel like I'm looking at all these different variables.
You have the big picture, you have all the data, and then you're just like brainstorming. All right, so what if I pull this here and this here? And that's how we work. That's why you can't teach people how to coach. That's where that goes back to where what we were talking about. You got to trust your coach, but for you to trust your coach has to at least try to explain the whys to you. So your coach has to be able to phrase things properly and not just bullshit things around and say like, hey, trust me because I want you to trust me, and then from now we just gonna make this change because it makes sense in my head. it makes sense in my head, but because of this, because of that, and then I'm bringing all the strings together, and I'm gonna get the physique you want if you trust me.
Yes, exactly. And majority of the time, I will say the change that we've made or the adjustment we make does work out, but sometimes it doesn't, and then I have to go back and be like, this is why I think it happened, or it doesn't, because you need to provide an explanation for that. But yeah, that's a very good point. And I don't know, I think listening to client feedback is just so vital, because a lot of the guys who come to me have been training 10 plus years. They have all this historical data on themselves, whether they record it or not. At least they know from their own experiences. So I think as a coach, it'd be kind of silly not to at least listen to that in some part and use that to inform your decisions. And that's kind of, I think, how you get the best result.
Nice. I think we touch a lot about training, and we can go back to what people really want to know about, which is PDs and GH and insulin.
Yeah, I was gonna say, training everyone turns off.
Because, dude, we all love to train. We all like training. That's why I'm not an athlete, because I know that sometime is going to require smarter training, and I just like doing what I love doing, which is going to the gym and training hard as fuck sometimes, even with no days off, because I'm addicted to it. So I know I can't be an athlete because I love training, and I'm going to overdo it sometimes. But when it comes to PDs and all that, I try to keep the safest approach, and that's where I'm trying to learn with the best. So I'm gonna take advantage of your time to learn a little bit more about GH and insulin. So we touch a lot about bulking. When do you think is the proper time to start the use of GH? And once you start it, is it better to the sooner you hop on gear, you start GH, so then you can take less gear because of the IGF-1 and all that pathways. And then once you start taking GH, should you start taking insulin? Is what goes through your thought process when it comes to make the decision of implementing GH and insulin?
Okay, great question. So as soon as possible, as much as possible. Okay, kidding, but actually not really. Okay, and what I mean by that is when it comes to growth hormone, you touched on it already. So I would say if you are a competitive bodybuilder, or at least someone who's want to put on a serious amount of muscle mass, you don't want to be enhanced, I would say you can almost start using GH immediately. Now, if you just started using PDs and you've just started using testosterone, okay, chill. You can wait till you start using GH. But if you are someone who's really informed, done a lot of research, you have a good coach, theoretically, you could start using 200 milligrams of testosterone and 2 to 3 IUs of GH in the evening. I actually do not think that's necessarily a bad idea. And the reason for that is, Felipe, what you touched on is that my approach to PEDs too is how can I leverage compounds which ideally are bioidentical, so things that have the FDA approval that are found within the human body, think testosterone, growth hormone, insulin. How can I leverage bioidentical hormones or compounds rather that work synergistically together to create a greater anabolic effect, or rather muscle building effect, which means I can have a lower total PED load. So when I approach my protocols, or the way I think about PEDs, is how can I'd rather use multiple different compounds which work synergistically together, so basically they don't have to blast a bunch of anabolics, and scale that to basically mitigate side effects. Because the way I see it is GH is somewhat, okay, I'm not going to say it's side effect free, but in comparison to anabolics, I would say it has much lower side effects, which means if we can use GH with their testosterone, so GH is going to upregulate protein synthesis, testosterone, anabolics can also upregulate protein synthesis. GH can, in a fat loss phase, liberate fatty acids, which can assist with lipolysis, so basically it will break down fatty acids from your adipose tissue, which then went through training or fasted cardio gets oxidized, so it can help you burn more fat, will basically help increase your REM sleep or your deep sleep. As you can see, all these little things are helping with overall muscle building. If you combine like a low dose of testosterone and a low dose of GH, which works synergistically, that might mean you can use less testosterone, or you have a greater pathway to scale testosterone. So most of the time, if my athletes can afford it, if they can acquire it, if they are looking to compare to bodybuilder, you're looking at competitive bodybuilding, I'll have them start GH almost immediately.
Immediately.
Yeah, immediately. I don't put it this way. If you're wanting to use testosterone immediately, why would you use growth hormone immediately? Is one more dangerous than the other? Is it only for advanced lifters? I think not. I think we should use the tools at our disposal to build muscle and stay as safe as possible. And I think lower effective doses to grow using compounds synergistically, which have a lot of medical data, are a good way to go. Now, of course, the thing with GH, and I always say this every time I talk about it, is if you have any pre-existing growth tumors or cancers, so you've had anything like that, GH can increase the rate of growth of those. So just, I always say that before someone's like, Adam, you said GH is safe, but I've had cancer. Like, no, I'm not saying it's
calm down, chill. Don't flip my words.
Yeah, exactly. There's a caveat to that. But yeah, so GH and antibiotics are almost right off the bat. I will have them use that, especially if they are female. So the way I approach female and male PEDs,
just wait,
very real different.
Quick.
Yes,
real quick. The phone is ringing. I told you I'm on call. Real quick. All right, we're back.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I think I'll rather discuss male PDs and I'll discuss female PDs because there's a difference, guys. And if your coach doesn't have a difference between them, then you should be worried. But
you should be worried.
Yes. But going back to the growth hormone thing, yeah, I'll almost implement it immediately to have a synergistic effect with their testosterone or basically anabolic, so we can get away with a lower dose overall, mitigate side effects, and have more room to progress. So typically, it would be like an evening growth hormone dose, but basically line up with your endogenous supply from your pituitary gland. We know from most of the medical data that is going to be the most effective time to take it. There's some rationale behind maybe like an intramuscular pre-workout dose. There potentially is a rationale behind a pre-fasted cardio dose.
Yeah.
But look, with that pre-fasted cardio dose, I think Kurt Haven speaks about it quite a bit. GH typically takes 2 to 3 hours to reach peak serum concentration levels. So that means like we have to take
really
it
doesn't make any
early.
sense in my head. It's like, why would you take it like right before cardio? It's not going to even be in your bloodstream.
Correct. So what I usually say to individuals is like, if you can do it intramuscular at least like an hour beforehand, if you can delay it, but I know that's not with everyone's schedule. So what I would actually prefer to do is increase the dose in the evening, because at a higher dose, remember, because basically the drug will clear. If you look at half-lives and how they work, basically the drug will clear, I believe, like every 4 hours, the dose sort of reduces. I think Dr. Todd Lee speaks about where, like, you know, if you're theoretically taking 8 IUs of growth at midnight by like, you know, 4 a.m., this should be about like 4 to 5 IUs basically in your serum, and it sort of drops like that. So the higher dosage, and you will see this on blood work, where if I have an athlete who's like using like 10 to 15 IUs, they're really advanced bodybuilder, they're quite large.
Oh yeah, then it's better to split it, right?
Well,
you're taking that, like, because then, like, at that point, you're gonna start like having things such as carpal tunnel and all that. So it's better to split the dosages as well.
Really, it depends on the athlete. So I've got athletes running literally 14 IUs who don't have carpal tunnel, who sleep very well, don't have edema, and they run it the majority in the evening. So it's really person dependent, correct? So you can't split it. But the whole rationale is that if you increase that evening dose, the idea is that you will still have some systemic IGF-1 elevation in your system when you wake up and you do that pre-fasted cardio. So that is sort of the rationale there. So I'd rather just increase it there. Again, if some individuals just want to do like an intramuscular GH shot an hour before their fasted cardio, go for it. I'm not saying
you're old school, dude.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's the worst thing in the world. That's fine. It's just, you know, at best, maybe you do get some additional lipolysis from fatty acids liberated, or at worst, it's just an extra dose of GH, an extra 1 IU. So typically, I'll keep it all pre-bed. There is the idea that you can use some pre-workout. Some will say it promotes local growth when injected intramuscular. I can't say I've ever seen that or any data on that promotes local growth when you inject IGF-1 intramuscular pre-workout. I know you can basically increase glycogen storage, because GH can do that if you inject some pre-workout. I have sort of experienced that myself anecdotally with myself and athletes, where if I have some pre-workout intramuscular GH, assuming this is like an hour or two pre-workout intramuscular, you will get basically feel fuller, have maybe some better pumps and some additional glycogen storage. Again, is it going to be essential? No. I'll typically do a pre-workout dosage if, as you correctly said, someone is getting edema, someone's getting a shitload of carpal tunnel, and it's like, okay, we've used 5 grams of taurine, we've got your electrolytes, you know, adequately. We've got 5,000 milligrams potassium, we've got enough fluid. So I've troubleshooted everything I can. Then I'll be like, okay, take some of that pre-bed dosage in the PM and put it pre-workout. But yeah, that's just a quick one on GH. But then when it comes to insulin, right? Insulin I see is truly as needed hormone, or rather as you need PD. And so what I mean by that is typically in bodybuilding we'll have short and long. Sorry, do you have a question?
No, yeah, my question is like, since we don't need a huge surplus, what's the point of taking insulin? Because, well, we're not going to
Ah,
be eating a shit ton of
yes.
carbs, right?
Yeah, so you've hit the nail on the head there, right? So with most of my athletes, because as I said, insulin is as needed, right? The way I view it is you're short and long acting insulin. I kind of use them for different reasons, and you can at the same time you can technically use both to achieve the same thing, but I'll show how I use them for different reasons. So when it comes to Lantus, long acting insulin, okay, that is completely on an as needed basis, which means correct. If you are in a slight surplus, if your insulin sensitivity is good, if you're, I will typically not use Lantus at all. But let's say we start seeing your insulin sensitivity creep up. I will look at using things like metformin. I will look at things using like berberine and other glucose disposal agents, cinnamon extract, fenugreek, alpha-lipoic acid, etc. Basically, go down the list of everything that can improve insulin sensitivity and give that to the athlete before, as a last resort, giving them a bit of Lantus when their pancreas cannot produce enough endogenous insulin to keep up with their carbohydrate dosage, but dosage demands. But for most individuals, that's quite rare. And I've got some pretty big guys, like I'm over 115 kilos lean, and a fair bit of them we're not even using Lantus because their insulin sensitivity is great. They're using a GDA with every meal. They're doing a bit of faster cardio, and
you're doing it properly.
So they don't do that. I think I've got like maybe 2 or 3 guys using Lantus, and that's been like after we've done all of that, and they're like 16 months into their off season, and food is like 6,000 calories, and then I've added some Lantus. Sure. That is,
and also for the sake of appetite, right? Because it increases appetite. The guys can eat a little bit more, feel a little less full.
And before I go to another tangent, like when it comes to, again, I'll leave the appetite one. That's a whole other question. But yeah, remind me about appetites. But when it comes to short acting insulin, right? That you can kind of use for a bit of a pre-workout performance benefit. What I mean by that is, if you typically for a Humalog or a NovaRapid, the half-life or active period is like 3 to 5 hours. So what you can do is you can basically dose that with your pre-workout meal to basically almost shuttle or force glucose, broken down carbohydrates, glucose, to be tried to store it as muscle glycogen to basically fuel additional workout performance. Now, is it going to make or break your workout? No. But I don't think if unless you are like post show and you have crazy good insulin sensitivity, or you're in a prep phase and have crazy good insulin sensitivity, I will still use, typically in an off-season phase, a bit of pre-workout Humalog, okay, or short-acting insulin rather, to basically shuttle a lot of nutrients to the muscle, okay, from using
facilitate protein synthesis as well.
Facilitate protein synthesis, basically. And then I will have, using my athletes in off-season, take their postprandial, basically post-meal fasting glucose, or have them also take their post-workout fasting glucose. And if I start seeing those creep up a little bit, sometimes I will use a bit of post-workout Humalog. But because it's 3 to 5 hours, quite rarely do I see them need to have a post-workout dosage, depending on how long they work out. But sometimes, they will work out for like 2 hours, and sometimes it will still be slightly elevated because they're deep into their off-season. They're just having a shitload of calories. They're also drinking an intra-workout drink, which has, fast digesting carbohydrates in it. And sometimes I'll have a bit of a high post-workout blood glucose, in which case I'll have them do a second Humalog dosage. And Humalog I use more so also for its, I guess, acute performance enhancing benefits in a workout setting, basically to help you, get through, especially if you have a slightly higher volume workouts. I think it quite shines there, having that additional muscle glycogen. So I'll use that around the workout window to basically upregulate, or rather, transport additional nutrients to the muscle, so to speak. And also the way I see it is like, when it comes to the hypertrophy process, right, we know that, having a sufficient amino acid is part of it. And my guess rationale is, if we have those amino acids readily available, basically being shuttled by insulin, having low insulin sensitivity, you're basically starting the recovery process quicker. The analogy I give is, imagine you cut yourself and you're bleeding. You can wait for the wound to coagulate and form a scab, or you can put a Band-Aid on immediately.
You can put a Band-Aid. That's the main purpose of an intra workout, because like during an off season, you already have the energy to train. You have enough glycogen to have a good pump. But if you're
Mhm.
trying to facilitate the recovery, then
Mhm.
you add an intra workout. And I guess with the insulin, that's gonna be even is gonna be enhanced even further. That
Yes.
makes a
So
lot of sense.
that's yeah. So that's how I'll typically go about Humalog. The other setting I may use Humalog if their fasting glucose is really good is let's have an athlete who just takes a shitload of carbohydrates during a hard day, like someone eating maybe 1,200, 1,500 grams of carbs. I'll get a few guys like that, where I will just have them dose like 1 to 2 IUs with each meal, depending on their fasting glucose. But again, sometimes they get away with GDAs, berberine, a bit of vitamin C, and they don't need it. But I have had some guys on a high day where we will multi-dose Humalog. And you might say to me, well, Adam, why don't you just use Atlantis on that day? Yeah, I've done that too. But again, this is my anecdotal experience, so don't take this as objective fact. But I usually find that Atlantis seems to degrade insulin sensitivity a fair bit. And I think Kurt Havens talks about basically beta cell downregulation. And I usually find as soon as Atlantis gets thrown in, it usually degrades insulin sensitivity a fair bit. Where I find the shorter acting insulin doesn't seem to have such an effect on that. And also, I would prefer to acutely control it, where if the athlete
Yeah.
is very good, meticulous, and we really try to dial things in, I'll have them take on a hard day their post meal fasting glucose. And if I do see it slightly higher, we will have a reactive amount of insulin taken. Now, I won't do this every hard day because you can imagine what a pain in the ass that would be. But I would maybe do it on 1 or 2 hard days to see if we do need the Humalog.
Yeah, you really gotta trust the client though, because some people don't even know how to measure it. So that's where it gets dangerous, honestly. I mean,
Yeah.
from my experience and from what I watch, the people do in Brazil is like they just want to use insulin because they can. It's cheap in the pharmacies, and because they want to eat a shit ton of food. That's the main rationale behind it. But now,
Yeah.
looking from the performance and recoverability capacities that you also promote, now it makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense in my head to keep on using it. Do you keep it during the prep phase, or since insulin sensitivity is already pretty high, you don't actually
Mhm.
need insulin?
Right.
How do you do it, like transitioning
Yeah.
into prep?
Mm. Good point. Again, it's going to be based on their sort of blood glucose, post training, fasting blood glucose in the morning. If, let's say, they transition into that prep phase, sometimes I will have a maintenance phase between, prep and the off season, but often because of timing, sometimes I don't with an
Mm-hmm.
athlete. And rather than maintenance phase, it's just a slight deficit. But in that phase, if they still have, not the great, blood glucose levels and insulin sensitivity, yeah, I'll still keep Humalog in until the point where insulin sensitivity is improved enough that
Uh-huh.
they would basically go hyper or it isn't required at all. And that can be different for athlete to athlete. But the best answer I can give is maybe in that initial growth phase where PEDs are still higher and only in a slight deficit, often they'll have still a bit of maybe like, maybe post-workout Humalog.
Nice, nice. Well, thanks for the lecture, for real. I really appreciate that. I'm pretty sure the people also appreciate that. The other guy that was supposed to be with us, I mentioned, his name is also Luis, and he's a
Mhm.
huge
Oh,
fan
nice.
of you and Colton. But unfortunately, now in Brazil, it's pretty late, and he's already in bed,
Yes.
so he
Mhm.
couldn't join us. But maybe in
Mhm.
the future, if we have a part
Yeah, of
two,
course.
we can dive deeper into insulin and GH, because that's not my
Mhm.
area at all. My area, man, is training. Is like,
Mhm.
if you want to talk about training, we can keep on going for hours. But for
Yes,
GH and insulin, I just want to like use a little bit of your knowledge to acquire
of
some
course.
knowledge. So I
Yes.
appreciate that for real. I'm pretty sure the listeners are also gonna appreciate that. But
Mhm.
then I just want to finish off with
Mhm.
uh, some questions
Of course.
that are still in my mind when it comes to bulking.
Mhm.
So when we were talking about the macronutrients, you mentioned that you want to keep the protein take uh, a little bit higher than normal, because, well,
Mhm.
what could go wrong with it if the person is not having digestive issues and all that? We know that it's not like toxic to you or whatever they call it.
Correct.
So how do you handle the fats? Is like you go
Mhm.
above a gram. It really depends on the person. How do you handle fat with PD
Mhm.
users, since they're not producing their
Okay.
endogenous hormones? How
Yes.
do you do it?
Yes. Very good. Very good example. So yeah, so if you have Philippe, to give a bit of context there, Felipe touched on like exogenous, not producing endogenous hormones. So if you're a natural athlete, you have to remember that endogenous cholesterol and dietary cholesterol form part of the cholesterol cascade to produce your sex hormone. So basically, if you're a natural athlete and you eat too low in fat, it will affect your thyroid, it will affect your sex hormones, and that can lead to hormone balances. So there's a minimum amount of fat you need to eat. And I believe as even a natural athlete, it sits somewhere about 0.25 grams per pound. I think if we translate that to kilos, I believe it's about 0.55, somewhere around there, grams per kilo. And usually I will set that as a base point for enhanced athletes. And that usually doesn't result in a lot of dietary fat. So usually that's like, for most individuals, obviously depending on their caloric needs and their body weight, it's somewhere around like 40 to 60 grams for the most part, for most male athletes. And there's also another reason behind that. So when it comes to fat intake, you have to differentiate between like quote unquote healthy fats like poly and monounsaturated fats and omega-3s versus saturated fats. And the thing is, when you are an enhanced individual, potentially using aromatase inhibitor, using anabolics, they can all degrade your lipid markers, okay? They can affect your HDL, your high density lipoprotein, basically your good cholesterol, your low density lipoprotein, your bad cholesterol. And there are other lipid markers like your apolipoprotein and lipoprotein B, but to keep it concise, PEDs can degrade your lipid markers, which affect your heart health, okay? Now, if you combine that with a high saturated fat intake, which can also degrade your low density lipoprotein, you increase your bad cholesterol, you're in a recipe for disaster. So for the most part, I will try to keep saturated fat relatively low. Basically, most of the saturated fat my athletes will get will be, trace fats from their protein sources. That's where most of their saturated fats comes from.
So like egg yolk.
Egg yolk, egg yolk, because I would say there are benefits, micronutrients in egg yolk. And there's a variety of fat sources there. So I will happily keep that, and even as well from like meat sources. Red meat can have a fair bit of saturated fat.
Fatty fish for the omegas and stuff.
Yeah, but correct. I will try to load them up on omega-3 fatty acids, which are rich in DHA and EPA. Okay, and that's because we know that is cardioprotective and it can basically increase or improve lipid health. So basically, what I do is keep saturated fat, as low as we can, and look at up-regulating or basically pushing up, healthy fat, so to speak. Yeah. So, and also, carbohydrates higher. So when it comes to fat, like long story short, typically most athletes I have sitting at about 0.25 grams per pound on a training day, because I typically follow a carbohydrate cycling model. And then on a rest day, I will actually increase their fats to about 0.35 or 0.5 grams of fat per pound, but telling them this is from healthy fat sources. So when I increase that fat intake, I'm not telling them to go eat like donuts. I'm telling them to have some salmon on that day, have some additional polymer, some nuts, things like that, to basically boost their healthy fat intake, and also to help with satiation, as we know that basically fat or dietary fat slows gastric motility or gastric emptying. So if you're pulling carbohydrates or overall food intake back on a low day to keep an athlete more satiated and full, I will use a higher fat intake to not only improve their health markers, but so digestion, so they can, especially in deficit phase, can maybe feel a bit more full. And also
for the sake of variety, right? Like having some changes during the week is good. Like during your, your off day, maybe having a little bit more fat and eat like a salmon or something. I love doing that. It's like who doesn't like it?
Yeah, exactly. So definitely some variety. I mean, I can go into like the ways I form my nutrition plans, but to be honest, basically the overall tenet is like, what do you enjoy? Which for many bodybuilders is a strange question, because they'll be like, I'll eat whatever you tell me. And I'm like, no, like there's so many different ways to achieve your macro, micronutrient, and digestive needs that I'm not going to force feed you shit you don't enjoy, because if you don't enjoy it, everyone cracks. Like everyone cracks at some point. So I'd rather not have you crack and just say, hey, I hate salmon and I want some other source for omega-3 fatty acids, or like, man, I just can't do chicken. I prefer like fish, beef, lamb, whatever the protein source that you have. There was, I coach a lot of Australian athletes, kangaroo. Yeah, kangaroo meat's the big thing. It's leaner than chicken and it's got a lot of micronutrients in there. So Yeah, dude, it's actually great. Depends how you cook it, though.
I was talking to a friend of mine. He said that, well, citizens are kind of like incentivized to hunt them. Is it true?
Yes, that's true. So they're considered a pest, and there's, I believe, an overpopulation problem with them. So in many states in Australia, you can just shoot them, run them over, eat them. is my understanding. Yeah, I've eaten it a few times myself. The way I would describe it is if you've ever had like a venison or game meat, so something like wild deer or bush buck or something like that, it's quite similar to that. So there's a very distinct taste. I will say, depending on the cut and how you cook it, makes a huge difference because, like I said, I coached and lived in Australia for 9 years, and I ate my fair share of kangaroo and tried all sorts of different cooking methods. And yeah, it is actually pretty good in terms of like its macronutrient profile, and also it's actually leaner than chicken breast. I think it's like 1 to 2 grams of fat per 100 grams on most cuts of kangaroo, which is pretty wild. So yeah, it's the case in point, right? If someone is like, man, I don't want to eat chicken again, I'm like, okay, well, what protein sources do you enjoy or what do you have available? And basically, that's how I sort of construct a nutrition plan with most of my athletes, where I give them what I call an example or ideal meal plan, where I say, you know, on an ideal world, this is what your foods would look like. But it's the principle or properties of the food I'm more care about, not the food themselves. What I mean by that is, if someone says to me, oh, for pre-workout, I want like cream of rice, you know, a bit of banana for some additional potassium and micronutrients and some whey protein, that's great. But then they say, oh, I don't feel like that, I don't have that day. Can I have rice, cereal, almond milk, and some fat-free Greek yogurt? It serves effectively the same purpose.
Yeah.
Don't give a shit. But because they know it's the properties I'm looking for, not the specific foods themselves. And that's why
adherence is the most important thing. You got to be able to adhere to the program. That's it.
Correct. And I find approaching nutrition like that, Trust, I don't think I've ever had an athlete be like, fuck, I'm so tired of my meal plan. I've actually never had that at this
point. I would say
it's
the easier thing for you to manage.
Yes, and because I'm tracking Chronometer, I can go in and then review all their micronutrient intake. So if they do make food swaps, you know, sometimes the athlete won't make the best food swap, and I'll go in as part of my check-in and, you know, review all their food data and be like, hey, next time, instead of like burger and fries, let's say, at a worst case, I'll say, why don't we have like a steak, some, you know, cut up baked potato wedges and like a fruit smoothie? Still tastes pretty good and kind of is much better micronutrient wise and sort of serves the same purpose in a surplus phase, for example. And give them feedback that way so that they feel like they're eating stuff they enjoy, but they're also hitting their digestive and micronutrient needs. And that's at least the way I approach nutrition, because I don't know, man. I think if you know, I think at the one side, I don't think you should be completely, if it fits your macros, I don't give a shit about the macronutrients. I'll just fit in whatever. And at the other hand, I don't think you should be like, oh shit, have to eat the same chicken rice meal for consistency, whatever it is. And I think somewhere in the middle where you're hitting the metrics, so to speak, is the way to be.
I have some specific rules that I tell my clients. I'm like, hey, you can only trade fruit with fruit. You can only trade chicken breast with lean meats. You're not going to trade like 100 grams of chicken breast for a fatty meat. You're not going to do that. It's like, it doesn't serve the same purpose. Or like all of my clients, I ask them, hey, what is your favorite like dessert or something, your favorite snack? And I try to add that to the meal plan. Oh, you're sick of that? At least try to hit the same amount of calories. So then they have some freedom, but it's limited. We're not like, hey, we're just going to give you these numbers. And then at the end of the day, what really matters is that you're hitting those macros. Because then what's the point of hiring us, right? Just go to an online calculator and do the calculations or whatever. So you mentioned carb cycling. How do you do it during the off season? Do you decrease do you lower the calories to a maintenance or even to a slight deficit? How do you do it during an off season?
Yes, I feel like most of my answers are like, it depends. But at the base level, I would typically lower calories to maintenance or deficit levels. Typically, I would shift more into deficit levels if I'm finding that their fasting glucose and the insulin sensitivity is starting to get quite poor. Okay, assuming they are at an appropriate rate of gain, because often it's just too much food and we need to pull back and they're just gaining too fast. But assuming they're not gaining too fast, insulin sensitivity is, degrading a little bit. I will look at putting them in almost like a slight or even moderate deficit on a rest day, or low day as I like to call it, where I will typically, like I mentioned before, increase fat intake from healthy fat sources and even increase protein intake a little bit, okay, to basically allow me to pull back on carbohydrates. The whole idea is that, when we're having sufficient calories and there's at least enough carbohydrates, you won't get protein, converting to glucose via gluconeogenesis. So the idea is that I can keep carbs pretty low on that day. The pancreas gets a little bit of a break, maybe puts in a slight deficit. If you want to be super nuanced here, you could make the argument that on these low days, I try to get them to do fasted cardio. I try to get them to take things like, L-carnitine, which can, liberate fatty acids. So the idea is that maybe on those low days, maybe they burn a little bit of fat and improve insulin sensitivity. I can't say that objectively, because at the same time, you can make the argument, well, Adam, they were glycogen loaded from the surplus day before. Correct. So, but I'm really shooting for just improvements or maintenance of good insulin sensitivity. So what I will do, like I said, is pull back to either maintenance or deficit level calories, increase protein and fat intake for satiation, and basically allow it to get more healthy fats, improve health markers. And then on the training days, or the medium days, as I like to call them, I will implement, baseline levels of protein anywhere from 1 gram to 1.2 grams per pound. Okay, can sometimes be higher than that. Rarely is. 0.25 grams of fat per pound of body weight, so about 0.55 per kilo is about the base level, line level fat I stay at. And for enhanced athletes, as you said, because they're getting exogenous testosterone, you can usually stay at that amount or even slightly lower, dependent. And the rest of the calories are usually made up of carbohydrates. Now, I sometimes will have a high day in 2 scenarios. One is they're in a deficit phase, and we're using that sort of as a strategic refeed day to basically ensure that the metabolism doesn't downregulate that fast. That's another discussion, but basically we know that an acute refeed is not going to basically upregulate your metabolism so much that you don't get that downregulation of your metabolism from a period of caloric restriction. But I think there is data to show that it can slow it. So as you are in a caloric deficit and as your metabolism slowly downregulates, as you become smaller and just need less maintenance calories, okay, you can sort of slow that down regulation by having strategic refeeds and restoring muscle glycogen. So the idea is to slow it with that hard air refeed. And the other rationale behind it is to facilitate their training performance. So if you're having low days and medium days, and then, I always tell them, do a refeed on the training day. We have at least 1 to 2 training days on the day after. So if an athlete has, for example, like an upper lower split, they're doing like an upper or upper lower arms, whatever their split is, I'll usually say do it the refeed on that first day, so you can make use of the higher food intake on that train day. You'll be glycogen loaded and then have better train the next day too. And that's one of the ways in the deficit I keep or maintain better training outcomes, train performance. But that's the one circumstance when I have a high day. And the other circumstance is if an athlete's in an off-season phase, they're trying to bring up a specific body part, the insulin sensitivity is good. I will say on the day you train back, we have a high day, or even maybe the day. So on the high day. So, and also people need to remember, like, the difference between having a high day for, performance-based sports like strongman or powerlifting is different
increases
from bodybuilding.
Yeah.
Yes. And also typically for strength sports and performance-based sports, you want to glycogen load the day before, because glycogen takes a while to synthesize, muscle glycogen. So you want to be typically load the day before so you can perform well the next day. But in bodybuilding, the idea is that you have a higher nutrient intake to facilitate, muscle recovery. And having that on the day that you actually train that body part. And also, like I said, I like to have the second training day after, so you can have that dual benefit. So you basically have higher food intake on that training day that you try and bring up that body part. And the next training day, because you're so loaded with carbohydrates, you have such full muscle glycogen, you have a great training day the day after as well. And that's how in an off-season phase, I might strategically have a high day if the insulin sensitivity is good, if they need it, if they're trying to prioritize the body part. And that's also where I use a bit of that, human log frequently dose throughout the day. And that's typically how I approach carbohydrate cycling. But as you can see, depending on the athlete, depending what phase they're in,
it really depends. Yeah,
adjust it.
It's more like a calorie cycling instead of a carbohydrate cycling. That makes
correct.
A lot of sense.
I kind of use that interchangeably, because for the most part, protein and fats don't change too much. So when I say calories, I mean carbs because I'm typically adjusting carbs down, but when I'm adjusting carbs down, I'm adjusting calories down. So
Yeah, the biggest adjustment come from carbs. But then
yes,
it's very important for folks to understand that it's a refeed and not a cheat meal, not a cheat day.
yes,
Because then it loses its purpose, right? It's
yes,
completely
yes.
different. But then you keep the same rationale for the prep phase, using the carb cycling during the prep phase with the same rationale.
Absolutely. So again, we know that maintaining training performance is going to be the biggest indicators that we're retaining tissue. So if you're in a prep phase and
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm making a number here, it's a 16-week prep, let's say, and you are like 10 weeks out and your training performance is taking a nosedive and you're starting to regress already, that is a big problem, which probably means there's a problem with like maybe your total training volume, maybe going too low on calories, maybe you're doing too much cardio. It could be any number of factors, but it is probably a red flag that, hey, something needs to be changed, and if you continue down this path, you will lose muscle. So then on the other hand, how do I maintain that training performance? Well, I want to bias calories, specifically carbohydrates, on those training days. So during a prep phase, absolutely, I will try and maintain calories as high as possible on training days and pull back for rest days. Then at certain points when I see weight loss stalling, I will implement those high days to basically act as a refeed day. And when
metabolic adaptation, right?
Yes, again, it's not going to reverse metabolic adaptations from dieting. You need to be in a prolonged surplus to do that, but it's going to, in my opinion, slow down the metabolic
Yeah, for sure. I think there's research to back that up. I'm pretty sure there is. I don't know if you mentioned Eric, Mass Research Review. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's the thing, man. All my training principles came from natural bodybuilding because back in the day,
my post tomorrow. Fuck, it's gonna be in Portuguese, so you won't be able to. I'm like, don't listen to enhanced bodybuilders. Listen to the natural ones.
Look. I definitely will caveat that would say there's a lot of enhanced guys who have great information.
Oh yeah, just generalizing.
Yeah. I know. But the reason I say that is because I came back from back in the day. I'm starting old now, where like information on training was very few and far between, and often you would get these big IFBB pros who are like fucking ginormous, being like, I just do drop sets and supersets, and that's how I got large.
Big together, bro.
And it's like, no, bro, you took a shitload of gear, and anything you did to train would have worked. There's no logic behind that. You could have fucking done anything, and you would have grew. So that's why back in the day, guys like 3DMJ, guys like Revive Stronger, Alberto Nunez, all those great pro natural bodybuilders, a lot of the guys I took a lot of my training information from because I knew, well, they're natural. PDs are not skewing their results. These training principles are pretty goddamn solid. That's how I applied it. Now, I think we have a lot of smart guys who are both, John Jewett's a great example. Guys who are enhanced and give good training information. But I would say if you are stuck and don't know where to look, like you start with the natural guys. Definitely 3DMJ, Revive Stronger, really, really good because you know that they're not going to have the variable of PDs, which can really change.
Let's be honest, like the best pro bodybuilders now, the best coaches that are enhanced, they were pretty good naturals.
Yeah,
they spend the vast majority of their lives as natural lifters, and then they hopped on gear and they got huge, and then they got famous. But then the vast majority of their knowledge and training and nutrition came from when they were natural athletes. So I would say that for folks that have role models that are enhanced just because they're big, it's like, hey, maybe it's better to second guess their opinions on stuff and start looking more to what the natural guys are saying.
Yes. I would say if you are a beginner and you try to see, sort through the sea of information out there, when it comes to training, I do think a good place to start, as we said, is, top level elite natural guys who put out educational stuff. 3DMJ's great example, Revive Stronger, Dr. Eric Helms, Alberto Nunez, and so forth. And then as you understand the principles more, that's when I think you can start looking to more of the enhanced guys, because then you can sort of differentiate between what is bro science and what has rationale behind it and what doesn't. I would say when it comes to nutrition, this can get a bit tricky because, for example, I, quite pretty good friends with like a lot of, top pro natural bodybuilders. And you have to remember, when you are a natural, things like saturated fat just aren't going to skew your lipids as much. And I would almost argue that you can be, I'm not saying as a natural person dieting is easy. I'm not saying as a natural person you can be more loose with your calories. But for example, if you're a natural individual and you're hitting your protein intake, and let's say on one day, you have a burger or whatever, it's not going to be an issue. But when you're in hard scale and using exogenous insulin, and you're having a post-workout burger with a shitload of saturated fat in it, using insulin. Well, what do you think that those fatty acids and triglycerides in your bloodstream, where do you think they're going to be stored as when you're using insulin? Probably going to be additional adipose tissue in a few caloric surplus. And that's a whole other topic, but like nutrient partitioning is a big thing when you are enhanced.
Oh yeah, it's chrononutrition as well.
Yeah, exactly. So that's when things can get a bit different. So when you're natural, just be aware that a lot of the dieting advice for natural individuals, maybe around fat intake, about micronutrients, is different when you're enhanced. I would argue when you're enhanced, you have to pay more attention to micronutrients rather, to basically offset the negative effects of PEDs and make sure there's no negative synergistic effects. Like, it's so common where guys tell me, I took insulin and I got fat. And I was like, yeah, I was in a surplus and I was like eating a pizza like pre-bed and fucking donuts. And I was like, oh shit. Why? Yeah, no shit, you got fat. Like, what was your fasting glucose? No. Like, yeah, okay. Like,
what is that, dude?
Yeah, exactly. So how you approach nutrition when you're natural enhanced will have a bit of nuance and difference there. But if you're a beginner, dude, like, yeah, honestly, there's such great natural guys out there where their results and their client results are driven through their principles rather than like, they're actually just fucking blasting. And I just increase the dose every month, and that's how they grow.
Because, dude, knowledge can go both ways nowadays. It's like there's so much free content on the internet and so much good content that people can kind of get lost into who to follow, who to trust. And then my advice to people is like, first, look at those that got their results without PDs and then scaled up from that. And once you feel like you acquire the most amount of knowledge that you could from free sources, then J3U is probably one of the best courses you can acquire. And then Mass is another one. And maybe now it's time to get a coach just for the sake of learning with the coach and not just competing or achieving your goals and stuff. But look for good content, look for people who are not science-based. I hate this term now, but who have some credibility other than their physique, That's how I would like to start like ending the podcast, with a good message to the listeners. Like, people, second guess those influencers that you're following. Maybe they're fake natties. You'll never know.
Exactly. I always say at the end of the day, right, and this is not me saying that I know everything or anyone knows everything. That's far from it. I'm always learning new things, and I don't claim to have the answer to everything, not in the slightest. But what I will say is that when you are learning and when you're learning from other people, you should always be able to have them explain things or say like, hey, I'm not sure, or say like, this is the reason behind that. Because if you can't explain the reason behind it in somewhat clear and simple terms, then usually there is no rationale behind that. You should really question, why are you following that individual? Because guys, I know most of the listeners or most individuals, especially like my clients, are like between the ages of 20 and 30 and may not have that longer term viewpoint that we all love bodybuilding, right? But it's actually a very short time in our lives. It's a very short time in our lives. And you want to be, I hate to use an analogy because I love both these guys, but do you want to be the Jay Cutler or the Ronnie Coleman? I'm sorry, Ronnie. But like, do you want to have, and again, this is not knocking Ronnie Coleman. This is making me use analogy saying like, do you guys want to be healthy in your 40s and 50s? Do you want to look like Mark O'Hearn? He's natural, but like, he looks great. Do you want to be looking good in your old age, being able to bodybuild forever? Because the way I see it is like, I love bodybuilding, and mostly all my clients and athletes do. And when I speak to them, they say like, what do you want to be doing when you're 40 and 50? Do you want to still be training, Or do you want to have a shitload of health problems and not be able to train and just look like you've never bodyboarded before? And most of the time it's no. So I get you want to build as much muscle as possible, but temper that goal with the idea that you want to also be doing this as long as possible.
Fuck
That's
yeah,
just my
yeah. That's the best way for us to finish this podcast. Is like, guys, there is life after bodybuilding. There's much more to life than bodybuilding. So,
Mhm.
get off the social media, find a new hobby, just find things that you actually enjoy doing. Because now people are hopping on gear like at such young ages, and bodybuilding is literally their lives. And then once they're 30, they can no longer do it. It's like, what you gonna do? You're gonna, kill yourself because now you're depressed. So
Mhm.
what? Where do you go from there? It's like
Mhm.
that thing is literally everything that you know of. That thing is literally your life. So my main advice is look for things outside of bodybuilding, and when it comes to doing bodybuilding, do it the smart way. And follow the right people and have some sort of self-conscious and train hard. Fuck, training is the coolest thing ever, dude. Is going to the gym. I love
Yes.
that feeling, for real. I don't know how
Yeah.
people find that a burden.
Yeah. I mean, again, you hit the nail on the head, dude. I could talk 2-3 hours about training because actually, even though I talk a lot about PEDs, that's my favorite aspect, training.
Training, dude, is fucking awesome,
Yes.
for real. If you ever go to Brazil, let's plan to go to a steakhouse and then
Oh, for
hit
sure,
one of
dude.
the famous gyms that they're opening in there. Because honestly, like, every time that I go back home, I'm like, fuck, you guys are going places with equipment and all
Mhm.
that. Because it used to be very like basics,
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
bare minimum, but now it's like the gyms are all fancy, and they're like side by side with the gyms that we have here in the US. I'm very impressed, very impressed, excited to
Yeah,
go
dude. No,
back.
South America in general looks amazing, and it looks great for bodybuilding. I mean, it sounds sad, but I almost choose my countries or destinations or holiday destinations based on where's good for bodybuilding, and we have clients competing. So Brazil definitely ticks those boxes.
The only problem with the shows in Brazil is that they're they don't pay enough for like athletes outside of Brazil to compete in, because it's very expensive to fly there, and paying for the show is not cheap at all, and the prizes are essentially nothing. I know the athlete is not doing for the sake of the money, but
Of
it's
course.
like that's also something, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the world over, dude. I mean, all these Southeast Asian shows, I mean, a lot of them had pretty good, performances in terms of the stage and everything like that, but there was no prize money. Like when Count One Pro
There's
Card,
no prize
there
at
was no
all.
prize money. Um,
Most of the competitions in here, they don't have a good structure. It's like the lining sucks, and the athletes are treated like shit, like animals. So there's no incentive. The folks, they competing here because they compete in Brazil because they can't afford to travel anywhere else. So
mhm,
they
mhm,
just stay there, and that's it.
mhm. Yes. Look, I hope that can change for the athletes because I've been to
Yeah,
shows in Australia, I've been to shows in Europe, I've been to shows in Southeast Asia, and yeah, unfortunately, there can be quite a differentiation in how athletes are treated. And I think if you're spending all this money all this time, the athletes should be the focal point. That's why the show exists, for the
that's why the
athletes.
show exists.
And I do think lighting should be good. I do think stage should be good. I do think the athlete experience should be good. I do think shows should have schedules because I've been to shows where they told me we don't know when you're going on stage, just be here.
How do you
um,
carbo for that? How do you plan accordingly? It's impossible.
I'll tell you, you buy a backstage pass for 300 USD and you sit there with jam, salt, and liquid calories and fruit juice and dried fruit, and then you try guess based on the other classes and you feed your athlete because that's exactly what I
Gosh, so
and you
frustrating, dude.
stress because you go, is they going to digest this in time? How long is the next class going to be? Oh, it's men's physique, there's going to be 100 people. Cool, we got time.
You see, yeah, it's hard, guys. It's really hard. Anyway, Adam, thanks for joining me. It was
Awesome.
a huge pleasure. I'm gonna leave all of your socials in the description. During
Thank
the
you.
week, I'm gonna be uh, doing the cuts and posting them
Mhm.
on Instagram. And guys, go hit them. Go follow Adam. he is phenomenal. His content is really amazing. His stories are priceless, and his posts just keep on getting better. Are you actually the one editing it, or you have an editor?
I used to be, but now my editor actually coach him. Funny enough, he's the biggest. He's the biggest editor I've ever come across. But no, he edits my stuff for me. But because he's a bodybuilder too, he really understands it, and I'm just so lucky to have him. He's a German guy. He's so
Yo,
good.
because every post that you're doing, I'm like, damn, they keep on getting better.
Yeah, dude.
You're setting the standard.
Yeah, bro. His name's Lars. If guys need an editor, hit him up. But yeah, he does it for me, and he's a bodybuilder, so he gets all the jokes. He gets everything.
Nice. You want to say something before we finish?
Just yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Thank you for everyone listening in. Like, I really respect and appreciate anyone who's always trying to further their knowledge. I hope people got value out of this. If you guys have any follow-up questions, you can hit up me and Felipe at any time. Like, Instagram is probably the best way to go. Really on anything, man. I'm always happy to try help people where I can. And otherwise, thank you again for watching, and have a great evening.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one, folks.